so if you are here, thank you. I appreciate that. This is a little bit of a different talk than many of other talks that I've given or that other people have given. It's really analyzing sort of our industry in general and posing some questions that I think might be valuable. So our agenda today, that said, is pretty straightforward. I'll tell you a little bit about who I am and why I might be qualified to speak on some of these topics. And we'll dive right into the real stuff, on what is really the essential purpose of information security as an industry. We'll ask whether or not our industry is successful at what it's trying to accomplish, and talk about both the future of the industry and how each of us might be able to improve the field that we're in. I left some time at the end for Q&A discussion. This was before I knew I was the last talk, which basically means we have until the party. But I think so it's about a 3-hour Q&A at the end of this. You cannot leave. The doors are locked. Actually, I think some people were talking about going to a karaoke bar. So there you go. Yeah, unlock the door. I got to get out of here. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is David Shaw. I am on Twitter occasionally at dshaw_. Underscore is very important. We switch each other up all the time. I am the Chief Information Security Officer at AppFolio, a software company in Santa Barbara, California. Previously to that, I was the Chief Technology Officer at Redspin, a computer security consultancy, until its acquisition in 2015. So basically what that means is I have current blue team experience and a whole lot of red team background. I'm also a 4-time NolaCon presenter. You might be doing the math, and yes, that's all of them. I can't believe it's already the 4th one. This is one of my favorite conferences. Thank you to the staff, which this time does include my wife. My areas of expertise and things that I've done span from security research to penetration testing, application security, security operations, developer training, and risk management. So I've really sort of spun around a lot and seen a lot of different aspects of our industry. And as I mentioned with the karaoke, by the way, I do not sing. This is under duress. I would love to grab a drink or a beverage or water or whatever with you and talk about some of these topics. So let's start the talk with a very simple question that has maybe more complicated of an answer than you might think. What is our purpose? Right? Really, what are we doing here? Information security, as I've sort of alluded to, spans many sort of subfields, each of which have their own specializations, right? Pen testing, AppSec, SecOps, malware analysis, red team, blue team, purple team, forensics, malware, all of these different fields, right? And each of those people, if you're an expert in one field, you may or may not be an expert in any of the others, right? But even in its diversity, and it is a very diverse field, we should have some sort of a unified goal and vision. So the example I like to use for this is sort of like health or healthcare, right? It's to sort of prevent and recover from maladies. We want to keep you from getting sick or keep you from getting hurt or help you get better from those things, right? So the goal of our industry really shouldn't be just to have fun or to break things, and many people think it kind of is, but those things are of course valuable as well. You want to have fun at work, but that's not the point. Why do we do things? Why do we attack these systems and networks and go to these conferences and learn all these new techniques and see what's happening, right? So traditionally, and when our industry was in its infancy, it was pretty simple. The answer to that was, well, we're going to help an organization stay secure. That makes sense, a little bit. But the problem is that we quickly learned that to promise people we will prevent a hack was basically a promise that no one could keep. You can be the best security team in the entire world, and if someone on the researcher or malicious side of things is a little bit better and discovers some zero-day, you're kind of screwed. You can have security layers, but in the end, you can't prevent with 100% certainty that you're going to get hacked, right? So we adapted. And now we claim to do things that improve an organization's risk profile and prepare for an eventual breach. And I said eventual here instead of inevitable because I thought it was more positive. But that's really what we do, right? It's like you hire a security team so that we can say, we're going to do our best to prevent a breach, but we're also going to be preparing for when that does happen, so that the impact is not so bad. Now, helping the risk profile of an organization makes a lot of sense, and this is more of an achievable goal, right? We can actually do that. And in fact, like CFOs and financial risk analysts have been doing this for a very long time. With financial risk. Financial risk is a concept that every business has to deal with. It's very common. Technical risk or technological risk is a lot newer, and that's where we come into play. We're sort of that counterpart of the overall risk structure. And that's good because organizations that better understand their risk will probably get hacked less than those who do not. Right? If you know that it's very risky to have a bunch of telnet servers linked to your credit card database with no password, that's good, right? You won't make that decision. Someone says, hey, it's a bad idea. And that's good because they'll probably get hacked less. And why is that the goal? And I don't mean this in a rhetorical way. I really mean, why do we not want to get hacked? Well, the general answer is that the business will lose money or somehow be damaged by that. Right? That's the actual answer. That's why you don't want to get hacked. So maybe the bank account will get drained, or customers will be compromised and they'll leave and protest, or stock price, which for a publicly traded company generally reflects the value of the company, will drop significantly post-breach when you have to tell, the street what's going on. Or maybe businesses won't want to partner with an organization that keeps getting hacked. It's like, we're linked and you keep getting hacked and it's not good for us. Or maybe you're someone who believe in the ethical implications of massive data loss, and maybe you don't want to lose everyone's health records, which is great and good. But are these assumptions, are these reasons even true? Or do we go to conferences like this and sort of bounce around in an echo chamber and tell it to each other and tell it to people outside of our industry? And I don't necessarily know the answer to that. But when was the last time you really heard about a company getting defrauded and they lost all their money and couldn't recover it due to hackers? Yeah, it happens. It does happen. But is that super common? Is that most of the breaches that you hear about? Generally not. Do customers leave an organization when a breach occurs? Do you say, oh, man, this store that I like to shop at, they got hacked, I lost my credit card number, never ever going to shop there again? Maybe. How does the market react to a breach? Does the stock just plummet? We'll go into that in a few minutes. What about businesses? Are they saying, no, I don't want to be a vendor. I don't want to be a business partner of you guys anymore? And of course, if you're one of those people that say, no, I actually work in security due to strong moral conviction, excellent, great, nothing bad to say about that. So to go into a little bit of a case study, let's take a look at everyone's favorite, or maybe least favorite, breach, Yahoo. Yahoo suffered what might be the worst breach in history, losing conservatively over 1 billion accounts. That is a lot of accounts to lose access to. There was massive news coverage, and it led to terrible press, and basically significant loss of consumer confidence in that organization's security apparatus, right? And on top of that, these announcements came at one of the worst possible times for Yahoo, which was actually in the process of negotiating its sale to Verizon. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. And the reason I use this breach is because based on all of those things, the scale of the attack and the news coverage and the timing, we can say that this is an impactful breach, right? This should make a difference to the organization. So this is a chart that I took when I made these slides from the beginning of 2016 until late April, maybe early May, of the stock price for Yahoo. And there were 2 breach announcements, right? There was one for 500 million accounts that were lost and another for 1 billion accounts. There's some overlap there. Can you tell by looking at this graph? It's a little mental exercise, and again, I know many of you may be familiar with this case. Can you see where those major breach announcements went? It was right here and right here. First breach announcement basically didn't do anything at all to the overall value of the company, and that's 500 million accounts. And then a few weeks later, I think 7 weeks later, an announcement that 1 billion accounts were earlier lost. Again, first was in 2014, the second was in 2013. And yeah, that went down a little bit. So the stock price did drop after the second announcement of a major breach within 2 months, which is pretty ridiculous to announce those things so quickly. But it took less than a month for the stock price to fully recover. To say, well, that basically didn't happen in the grand scale of things. But of course, there's the Verizon deal. And what about all the executives who are being compensated very heavily in stock, right? Their bonuses and their major net worth is in Yahoo stock. So what happened to them? What is the lesson that they really learned? Well, there were financial repercussions. The sale price for Yahoo to Verizon dropped about $350 million. I think actually exactly $350 million, which is 7% of the deal. And that's pretty big. That's a lot of money, right? But if you do the math, you say, okay, well, conservatively, 1 billion accounts were lost or compromised. That's only 35 cents per account. And that's And that's not really that much money. You know, in a deal this big, is that really going to torpedo anything? And yes, there may be some legal repercussions for Yahoo, basically because of the whole cover-up thing, which we're not going to get into. That's not the purpose of this talk. And Yahoo's head counsel did resign, and Marissa Mayer did lose some of her bonuses for last year. And it's like, okay, well, that's not good. But then when the deal went through, she made $186 million. So again, what's the lesson that you're learning here? It's like, well, yeah, we can get hacked and we can cover it up, and I'm still going to make almost $200 million. I mean, that's probably not the lesson that as a security industry, we want people to take from something like this, right? And it's not just Yahoo. I don't want to pick on Yahoo. It's just a very poignant breach. The pattern's actually very common. Here's Target, right, which suffered a pretty major breach. Can you see where it is here? Right there. It's like, oh, well, there's a little slide after that, but immediately after the breach announcement, the price actually went up. Now there's Home Depot, which, by the way, I mean, that's a pretty crazy stock chart in general, but can you see where in this chart the major breach announcement was for Home Depot? Did they lose all of their customers? People said, we're only going to go to Lowe's now. No, it's right here. Nothing really happened. Stock continued to climb because they're a business and they're doing good work. People like to go to Home Depot. This is Heartland Payment Systems, which is a payment processor. Definitely something that you would think would have a major impact if there's some sort of a data breach, right? And this isn't quite current because they went off the market. But no, it's right here. They took a little bit of a dive in early 2009 when this was announced, and then just steadily climbed to a ridiculous point over 100 later, right? So in summary, and the point of this, and I'm not going to keep showing you stock charts this whole talk, but in summary, security breaches do cause fines, and they do cause PR issues, and they can be very costly. I'm not trying to say that they aren't. But that said, they don't generally impact the overall success or failure of an established business in and of themselves. People didn't stop buying their lumber at Home Depot, right? That's just not how it worked. People didn't stop shopping for Christmas presents at Target. So to assist in this presentation, I sent out basically a very short survey to some security experts in the field that I really respect, and I think that they have an opinion that I would sort of consider valid. And when asked how strongly they believe that the general non-technical public will cease using products, services, or companies that are shown to be insecure, on a confidence scale, they responded with 2.8 out of 7, which is, in layman's terms, not very confident. Basically saying customers aren't really going to leave just because you're insecure, at least not yet. Maybe that's an education thing that we can work on. But in other words, based on these 2 points, organizations that are hit with even the worst breaches may not actually lose value as a company, which is of course the equity, or their customers. Which brings us back to our original question. What are we working towards here? So if we can't prevent breaches, and when we fail to prevent a breach, the result isn't necessarily catastrophic, what is really the purpose of the information security industry? Now, I don't claim to have all of the answers, clearly, but I do have some interesting suggestions from some of the colleagues that I polled. So when I asked what they thought, quote, the paramount goal of the information security industry should be, not necessarily is, leaders in the field came back with some pretty interesting answers. Andy Ellis, the chief security officer at Akamai, said to help businesses make wiser risk choices. And I really like this a lot, because it doesn't say to eliminate risk. It doesn't say to not get hacked. It says to make wiser choices, to be informed on what you're doing and not do things blindly. Daniel Miesler, the director of advisory services at IOActive, said to make it generally safe to do business at a fast, innovative pace. And I like this as well, because it's talking about the role in security actually empowering the rest of business, right? Jason Haddix, head of trust and security at BugCrowd, said to reduce risk to a manageable level. And I thought this was valuable as well, because it doesn't say to eliminate risk. It says just make it so that we can manage it, and we sort of know what we're up against a little bit. So these answers generally conform to sort of the following goal, which I've paraphrased. We as an industry are here to help and to inform. We manage and analyze risk so that businesses can bring in revenue. Businesses exist to make money, unless you're a nonprofit, I guess. Right? So the entire point of them going out and getting a red team security assessment isn't to say, oh, I want to see you melt our servers. We can do that. I think many people in this room, or certainly at this conference, can say, well, I'm pretty confident that I can root any software that might have, serious vulnerabilities in it, right? Okay, cool. That's great. But are we managing that risk? Are we informing these companies? And are we even succeeding in that? Are we succeeding in even just saying, here's where your risk lies? Maybe. When asked how strongly these people agreed with the statement that the information security industry is, in general, successful in accomplishing its goal, the panel averaged 4.3 out of 7 on that confidence scale, right? So that's not terrible. 4.3 is respectable, I guess. It's over half, like something, maybe. But there's a lot of work to be done, right? It's not great. It's like, yeah, we're doing an okay job. So if we look towards the future, how can each of us help our industry succeed? Many of us here are in the industry, or at least tangential to the industry. And is there anything that we can do to really make things better? And I think a good first step, hence this talk, is to remember why businesses need us in the first place. It's not for our own goal of, like I said, melting servers. It's not for just a compliance checkbox, although unfortunately many businesses might think that's the case. And security is a rewarding field. I know from my red team experience that when you pop a shell, like, it's a great feeling. It is very rewarding. And you're like, yeah, I did something cool. And you go to DEF CON, you go to Black Hat, and you go to NolaCon so that you can learn new techniques and new ways to do that. But by definition, we're a support role in organizations. Unless, of course, you're selling security services. A lot of people want to be this guy, right? You want to be zero cool. You want to have weird sandwich placement. And you want to just root TV networks in the middle of the night. But that's not actually who we are. And I speak for probably many people, and certainly myself, when I say that, yeah, when I joined the information security industry, this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to break into stuff. I wanted to be cool. I wanted to learn. I did not want to wear those glasses, but that's okay, right? But really, we're this guy. We're trying to say, get out of our Gibsons. I'm going to wear a headset and, embezzle money, I guess, right? I mean, that's who we are. We're the plague in this analogy. A lot of red teamers want to run around and be Rick, right? You want to go and you want to do cool experiments and be smart and be smarter than everybody else and blow shit up. And that's awesome and cool. But really, we're this guy. And if you haven't watched Rick and Morty, this analogy might be lost on you. But you're basically trying to guard the galactic spaceport. You're like, business should run as normal. I'm just going to stand here and be a bureaucrat and do my job, right? If you haven't watched Rick and Morty, you probably should. So looking towards the future, instead of repeatedly exploiting software and rooting systems, as fun as that can be, and we can continue doing that, I'm not trying to say red teams are pointless, we should be training developers who are writing vulnerable code, right? Why do they keep doing that? Security teams should be integrating with other technical silos within organizations, right, to better address risk. So if security stays separate from developers and they stay separate from operations, we'll never really be able to fix things. It's going to be the people writing the code that are going to fix things, or, if you're a pessimist, make things worse, right? As it stands right now, the people that are making the biggest impact in the security industry are framework developers, right? If all of a sudden Rails or Django say, it's actually now almost impossible to write SQL injection or cross-site scripting or cross-site request forgery or anything else, right? Talking about web applications specifically here, well, then developers, even ones who don't understand security, will there's no point, right? So looking towards the future, when asked whether the security industry will be relevant in 10 years, those I surveyed averaged 6.7 out of 7 on that scale, which is very, very high, especially for a fairly large sample size of people. So basically, yeah, we have a lot of work to do. I'm not trying to be fire and brimstone, the industry is pointless or anything like that. But it is very high confidence, but it's from within the industry, right? So there is bias there. And that's only going to be the case. We're only going to be around doing this kind of cool stuff in 10 years if we can adapt to a changing role in our field. Information security is still in its infancy, and we're just now growing up to be a real industry, right? Not just a bunch of us having fun and learning cool stuff. Our goal here should be to build, not to destroy. So how can you help? It's not that complicated. Empathize with those who fail the most at security, whether that's an end user who just doesn't care and doesn't understand why any of this stuff is important, or a PHP developer who writes vulnerable authentication mechanisms over and over and over again. And you wonder, why are you doing that? Because the tendency, or at least my tendency, for a long time was to sort of, not like these people. It's like, well, you don't care, or, oh, you're just dumb, and that's not the right approach. We should be teaching people security. Because in an ideal world, if we're successful, we'd make our own field obsolete, and it's a scary thought. If we continue to improve things each year, eventually, there is no more, NolaCon or DEF CON, because there's no reason to have a huge security industry. We don't need to throw billions of dollars at this every year if things are more inherently secure. And that's scary, and it's an uncomfortable thought, but it's something that we should really consciously think about. We should make it security's mission to help businesses achieve their goals, even if that requires managing risk that a security-focused mind may not like. If you're at work and your boss says, hey, we have a new service that's going to bring in $50 million a year, but we're going to have to do it by opening a bunch of telnet servers to the internet. I don't know what that service might be. You shouldn't say, no, you're an idiot, don't do that. You should say, okay, well, there's a lot of risk involved with that, but if it's going to make a whole bunch of money, let's try to figure out how to mitigate some of that risk and make it feasible. That's our job. We're supposed to help people, not shit on them, right? For lack of a better term. And lastly, we should be thinking critically about security's role and joining the conversation. I said a lot of things in this talk, some of which I strongly believe, others I just think is worth posing the question. I don't know where the security industry is going to go. I don't know exactly where we're going to be in a decade or more, but I think it's worth thinking about and actively participating. So, thank you all for attending my short talk at the end of the day. I know it's been a long day. My slides are online at dshaw.net/nolacon17.pdf. If you'd like to talk to me directly, you can tweet me or send me an email at dshaw@dshaw.net. Any questions, comments, concerns? Do you think I'm totally wrong? I would love to hear that. It might be a strong statement. or am I just going to suffer at karaoke alone? That's my fate. we all have a fate. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For Home Depot, it was insured.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Insurance. Was there a payout? Same with the Target. Was there a payout?
But was there a payout? Do you mean was there an insurance payout to the organization? I believe.
And now for Sony, it was supposedly an ADT.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe no payout because that's a form of warfare.
Sure. Are you insured for war? Yeah.
So I'm wondering, is it maybe the loss was incurred in fines, like from the regulatory?
Absolutely. And I don't mean to say that there were no financial repercussions, because there absolutely were in, I think, all of the cases that I pointed out, whether or not the security paid out, or the insurance paid out. But my point is more along the lines of overall value of an organization. Will Home Depot fail post-incident? Will Target fail, or Heartland Payment Systems, which clearly did not? So, if you're a consumer, and you were affected by, for example, the Target breach, I can even talk from personal experience. I was hit in the Anthem Blue Cross breach, right? Did I stop using Anthem Blue Cross? Well, no, right? And did it cost them money? Absolutely. But did it devalue their company significantly? Not really, right? So that's sort of the point I'm making there. Not that there are no, not that there are no financial repercussions, because there certainly are. But if you're a large organization, what does that mean? Yeah. Mm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, in the other two, maybe Yahoo, maybe Morty, leaked my card, but I'm not worried about it.
Right. 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 Right.
Business, there isn't, I'm just talking about business with another business.
Sure, although I think the counterexample to that would be Heartland, right? I mean, that's not, But I agree with you. I agree with you in general. And again, I'm not trying to say that no financial repercussions occur or that B2B and B2C. I agree, especially for Yahoo, where you're not even really paying for the service, you are the product. I totally agree with that. Totally agree with that. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And what happened to the security team, right? I think the security spend actually increased pretty significantly, at least for Target, right? And Yahoo's sort of an edge case because there was some hiding, right, involved, so the security team wasn't necessarily aware of that breach in the beginning. It's a weird edge case there, but it's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Over the years, many years ago, they always talked about that a breach could be the end of a small company.
Yes.
Feeling after looking at the data these days, so you know, can a breach about the end of a company?
Yeah, so I intentionally sort of said that the major breach is not necessarily the end of an established company, because I do think that if you're a startup and you get a bunch of users and then you have to tell all your users that you've lost all their information, that's probably going to be significantly more impactful, right? I don't have data offhand on sort of smaller breaches like that, but I think that basically any business process hiccup for a small organization can be much more impactful, right? Even a sales pipeline issue, right? It's an interesting question because many small, especially startups, especially funded startups, are focused so much on acquiring users and acquiring additional funding that they don't really have a security spend, and then they get in this weird situation where all of a sudden they're very well, maybe post Series A, they're very well funded, and they go, oh shit, we got to go back and do this, otherwise it's going,
But I think it's interesting that somewhere there's a point where
Yep.
some companies become immune where other companies can actually fail from.
Yeah, and I don't know that it's necessarily immunity, but yes, I mean certainly significantly less impact. Yeah, we'll put it that way. I don't know, and I think that's a risk management question. If you're working for a startup and you talk to VCs and you get your Series A funding, you need to say, okay, well we have $100 million or whatever. Do we want to spend this solely on marketing and sales and advertising and user acquisition, or do we want to say, okay, well now we need to do some technical debt assessment and actually get security staff and operational stuff, or do we just want to keep selling our minimum viable product, right? And that's actually a great example of where I think you should have at least a few security people who can say, well, here's the technical risk that we're facing. If you're someone like Tinder, and if you get breached, all of someone's swipes could theoretically be leaked. That's even like a personal safety issue, right? So you say, okay, well, that's a very strong risk. If you're something like, not to pick on Yahoo again, but if you're something like Flickr and you're like, yeah, I mean, then it's like, well, if we get breached, are people going to freak out? Maybe not. Yes. Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Yeah. HVAC system. It's the HVAC guys. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah, I do think that sort of the downstream effects are very interesting. I didn't want to go so deeply into that for this particular talk. I didn't want to go too deep into well, here's all of the cascading effects that could theoretically happen. But yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to know how, Target's HVAC vendor is doing these days. Probably not super well, I would imagine. But I don't know. Maybe they are. Maybe no one cared. All right. Any other questions, comments? Cool. Well, thank you guys for coming. And, Rob asked me to remind everyone that the party begins at 8 p.m. tonight here. Brown coat band goes on at, I think, 8:50.